It held the knowledge of the ancient world, scrolls from every known civilization, discoveries lost to time, names of thinkers history no longer remembers. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building, it was a beacon of human progress. And then it disappeared. Not in one single fire, but slowly, mysteriously, like the pages of a book being torn away, one by one. Tonight we explore the rise and fall of the most legendary library in history, and the unimaginable things we may have lost when its shelves turned to ash. No one knows exactly when the Library of Alexandria was founded, but historians believe it was around 300 BCE in the thriving Egyptian city of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great. At the time, Alexandria was a wonder in itself, a city of light trade and learning. Under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, it became a cultural melting pot, where Egyptian priests, Greek philosophers, Persian scholars, and Indian mathematicians walked the same streets. But at the heart of it all was the library. More than just a building, it was a dream. The goal, to collect every written work in the known world. That's not an exaggeration. Ships arriving at the port were searched. Any scrolls they carried were seized, copied by scribes, and then returned, or sometimes kept with the original placed in the library. Scholars were invited from across continents. Some say even the works of Homer, Aristotle, and lost poets like Sappho sat side by side in its massive halls. Estimates say the library once held between 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. That's like having the internet in a time before paper books. But more than the volume, it was the spirit of the library that set it apart. People didn't just store knowledge there, they created it. Mathematicians developed theories. Astronomers mapped the stars. Physicians wrote on human anatomy and disease. The library became a magnet for genius. And at the center of it all was the Mauseon, a kind of ancient research institute where scholars lived, studied, and debated. The minds gathered there rivaled any Ivy League or think tank today. And their goal was simple: understand the world. But where there is knowledge, there is danger. And where ideas flourish, power often follows. The library's influence grew. So did its enemies. In the next part, we'll explore the people behind the library, the rulers who protected it, the thinkers who fueled it, and the early signs that its light might not shine forever. Because while the library rose in pursuit of truth, it stood on a world built on conquest, rivalry, and flame. At its height, the Library of Alexandria wasn't just a place to store scrolls. It was a living organism growing and evolving with every passing year. Much of its success came from the men who ruled Egypt during the Ptolemaic dynasty. Greek rulers descended from Ptolemy Thorn, a general under Alexander the Great. These kings weren't just political figures. They saw themselves as guardians of knowledge. Ptolemy, I laid the foundation for the library, but it was his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus who turned it into a true jewel of the ancient world. He didn't just want books, he wanted everything. He sent emissaries across Greece, Mesopotamia, India, and North Africa, instructing them to collect scrolls, writings, and even oral histories. Every ship that docked in Alexandria was searched. Every text was copied. Scholars were paid to translate foreign works into Greek, the common language of the educated world at that time. But the heart of the library wasn't just its rulers, it was its scholars. One of the most famous was Eratosthenes, a polymath who lived around 200 BCE. Using only a stick a well, and his brain, he calculated the circumference of the earth with stunning accuracy centuries before Columbus ever set sail. Then there was Hipparchus, who began cataloging the stars, and Herophilos, a physician who dared to study the human brain, and Callimachus, the first person to try and create a catalog, essentially the first ancient card system for organizing all the scrolls. This wasn't just a library. It was a laboratory for the human mind. But as the centuries passed, so did the stability that had once protected it. Political tensions in the Mediterranean rose. Rome's influence grew. Alexandria became a crossroads not just of knowledge, but of rival empires. The first real blow came in 48 BCE. Julius Caesar, embroiled in a civil war in Egypt, found himself surrounded by enemy forces in Alexandria. In a desperate move, he ordered the burning of enemy ships in the harbor. The flames spread, and many believe they reached parts of the city, including warehouses containing scrolls from the library. Historians debate the extent of the damage. Some say it was a devastating loss. Others say only a portion burned. But one thing is clear, something was lost that night. Something we would never get back. But that wasn't the end. The library endured damaged, but not destroyed. Yet each generation that followed brought it closer to the edge. In the next part, we'll uncover how religious conflict, shifting ideologies, and the rise of new empires all chipped away at the library's soul, and how one of the greatest female scholars in history became a symbol of its final days. Because sometimes it's not fire that ends an idea, it's fear. By the time Rome had fully absorbed Egypt into its empire, the Library of Alexandria had already suffered wounds, not all from fire, but from neglect, politics, and fear. Under Roman rule, the library's funding began to shrink. The passion that once drove rulers to collect the knowledge of the world was slowly replaced by administration, power plays, and eventually, apathy. But it wasn't just politics that chipped away at the library's foundations. It was belief. As Christianity began to spread through the Roman Empire and eventually became the state religion under Emperor Constantine, a new tension arose between faith and reason, between divine truth and human inquiry. By the 4th century CE, Alexandria had become a city torn between ideologies. There were still scholars. There were still scrolls. But the library, or what remained of it, had become a shadow of its former self. Its collections were likely spread out into various annexes, including the Serapeum, a temple complex where some scholars believe many scrolls were stored. And that's where a tragic name enters the story: Hypatia. Hypatia was a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher who lived in Alexandria in the late 4th and early 5th century. She was brilliant, widely respected, and perhaps most importantly, a woman in a world that feared women with power. She taught about Plato. She refined instruments used to measure celestial bodies. She wrote on mathematics in a time when few dared to question the stars. To many, she was the last great scholar of Alexandria. But Alexandria in her time was a city boiling over. The once great city of knowledge had become a stage for religious conflict, pagans, Christians, and Jews, all fighting for influence, sometimes violently. And Hypatia, though not political by nature, became caught in the storm. In 415 CE, after being accused of influencing political decisions and refusing to convert to Christianity, Hypatia was attacked by a Christian mob. They dragged her from her chariot, stripped her, and murdered her in the streets. Her death was not just the end of a life, it was the symbolic end of an era where philosophy could challenge dogma, where observation could question belief, where a library could hold the secrets of 100 civilizations. Shortly after her death, many believed that what remained of the Serapeum and its scrolls were destroyed. But again, like so many moments in the story of Alexandria, there is no single fire, no single villain, no final explosion. The library did not fall with one sword. It faded through fear, ignorance, and the slow erosion of curiosity. In the next part, we'll explore what we might have lost, what scrolls could have survived, what ideas may have changed the world, and how history has tried to imagine what that vanished treasure might have contained. Because when knowledge dies, we don't just lose facts, we lose possibilities. By the time the dust settled and centuries passed, the Library of Alexandria had already become legend. It's said that when the final scroll was lost, the light of 1,000 worlds went out. That may sound poetic, maybe even exaggerated, but when you begin to understand what the library might have held, the weight of that loss becomes very real. So, what exactly did we lose? To be honest, we may never know. But historians, scholars, and dreamers have speculated for centuries. Some believe the library housed the complete works of Sappho, the ancient Greek poet whose surviving verses today barely fill a handful of pages. Others think we lost the writings of Democritus, who proposed that all matter is made of indivisible particles. Atoms nearly 2,000 years before modern science caught up. There were possibly lost medical texts describing brain surgery, cataract treatments, and anesthesia techniques from early Egyptian physicians that could have changed modern medicine centuries ago. It's also believed that the blueprints of Heron, a Greek-Egyptian inventor, were once stored there. He reportedly created primitive steam engines, vending machines, and automated doors in the 1st century AD, long before the Industrial Revolution. Imagine if that knowledge had spread. If the steam engine had been refined 500 years earlier, would we have had space travel by the Middle Ages? Would antibiotics have arrived before the Black Plague? These are questions we'll never have answers to, because the books are gone. But even more than inventions and science, the library may have held alternate versions of history itself. Scrolls that recounted the rise and fall of forgotten kingdoms. Eyewitness accounts of ancient wars, lost cities, vanished languages. Myths and epics passed down orally for generations, finally written, then burned. And perhaps most chilling of all ideas, philosophies that challenged power. Theories about the universe that made rulers nervous. Questions about the divine that institutions feared. That's why some believe the library wasn't just destroyed by accident, but by design. Because when knowledge threatens authority, it becomes dangerous. The Library of Alexandria is now a symbol, a cautionary tale, a reminder that preserving knowledge is a choice, and losing it doesn't always come with flames. Sometimes it comes with silence. In the next part, we'll travel forward in time, centuries after the library fell, and discover how its legend inspired scientists, poets, and even modern efforts to rebuild what was lost. Because while we may never recover those scrolls, the dream they represented still burns. Centuries passed. The city of Alexandria changed hands again and again. Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Ottomans. Time wore down its buildings. Sand swallowed some of its streets. But the story of the library refused to fade. By the Renaissance, whispers of Alexandria's glory began to surface again. European scholars, suddenly intoxicated by the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts, began asking the same question. What else had we lost? The idea of the Library of Alexandria, this impossible vault of wisdom, became a beacon to dreamers, scientists, and poets alike. Figures like Francis Bacon and Leibniz envisioned a new world where knowledge could once again be collected, and shared a world where all human learning could be preserved in a single place. Centuries later, that dream would evolve into real efforts. In 2002, on the shore of the very same Mediterranean coast where the original library once stood, Egypt inaugurated a bold new building, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a massive modern library built in tribute to its ancient predecessor. Its design, sleek, circular, tilted toward the sea, is meant to resemble the rising sun of knowledge. Its walls are inscribed with scripts from every known human alphabet. Inside, over 8 million books, a planetarium, a museum of antiquities, and digital archives that preserve texts from across the globe. It's not a replacement, but it's a resurrection of the spirit. And here's the most beautiful part. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina doesn't claim to recover what was lost. It seeks to protect what remains. It stands as a monument to memory, a promise to future generations that we will not let knowledge be forgotten again. And yet, its existence also reminds us how fragile knowledge truly is. All it takes is war, or ideology, or simple neglect, which is why modern scholars, libraries, and digital archivists fight not just to collect information, but to share it, to translate, preserve, and digitize it, to ensure that stories like Sappho's theories, like Democritus's, and wisdom like Hypatia's are never silenced again. In the next part, we'll explore the deeper symbolism of the Library of Alexandria, why it continues to haunt our imaginations, inspire storytellers, and warn us of what happens when knowledge becomes inconvenient. Because sometimes, Legends survive not because they're perfect, but because they matter. By now, it's clear the Library of Alexandria was never just a building full of scrolls. It became something more, something mythical. To this day, no one knows for certain where it stood. Excavations in Alexandria have uncovered bits of column foundations and ancient halls, but no definitive remains of the great library have ever been found. And maybe that's part of its power, because the Library of Alexandria doesn't live in stone or marble. It lives in the human imagination. To scientists, it's the symbol of lost potential. To historians, it's the what if that haunts every burned page. To writers, poets, and artists, it's the eternal metaphor for memory and forgetting. Every time a language goes extinct, every time a manuscript is censored, every time a piece of data vanishes with a crashed server or a lost hard drive, somewhere in the silence, we hear the echo of Alexandria. It reminds us that knowledge isn't invincible. Even today in the digital age, the same forces that once threatened scrolls still exist. War, ideology, pride, neglect. What the library stood for the belief that all knowledge from all cultures should be preserved, respected, and shared remains a radical idea even now. That's why it continues to inspire not just historians, but filmmakers, architects, and digital pioneers. When sci-fi authors imagine vast data vaults orbiting Earth, when online communities build public archives free for anyone to explore, when students in remote villages connect to libraries through satellites, that's Alexandria reborn in spirit. And perhaps that's the lesson the library truly left us. It wasn't about the scrolls. It was about the search, the hunger to understand, the hope that every voice, no matter how ancient or forgotten, might still have something to say. In the next part, we'll hear from modern thinkers who have tried to answer one timeless question. Can the Library of Alexandria ever truly be rebuilt? Or is it something we must each carry, not on shelves, but in our hearts and minds? Because sometimes, the greatest libraries are not made of stone, but of memory. Can the Library of Alexandria ever truly be rebuilt? It's a question that has echoed for centuries. Some say yes. They point to modern libraries, vast, digitized, interconnected places like the Library of Congress, the British Library, or the World Digital Library, which aims to provide free access to humanity's greatest works in multiple languages. Others say no, because what Alexandria represented wasn't just volume, it was vision. It wasn't just a repository of texts. It was a living, breathing experiment in global unity through knowledge. It welcomed scrolls and Sanskrit poetry from Persia, hymns from Egypt, philosophy from Athens. It saw no border between East and West, only ideas flowing freely. And today, despite our technological advances, the world can still struggle with that idea. Modern archives can be gated behind paywalls. Texts can be censored or rewritten. Voices from less powerful nations may be lost in the noise of louder ones. But here's the quiet truth that modern thinkers have begun to realize. We no longer need a single building to house all knowledge, because we collectively are the library now. Every person who learns a language, every teacher who shares a story, every parent who reads a bedtime myth passed down from their ancestors, they carry the flame of Alexandria forward. And every time you preserve a document, scan a photo, or tell a forgotten tale, you're rebuilding the library word by word. That's why movements like open access publishing, crowdsourced translation projects, and even platforms like this one matter. They're not perfect, but they're built on the same belief that no knowledge is too small, no voice too quiet, and no story too old to matter. Alexandria's greatest gift wasn't in what it stored. It was in what it inspired. It reminded us that knowledge belongs to everyone, that learning should never be limited by geography, language, or power, that every burned scroll is a reason to protect the next one. In the next and final part, we'll close this journey with one last reflection, a meditation on memory loss and the quiet courage of those who keep seeking even when the shelves are empty. Because as long as we search, the Library of Alexandria is never truly gone. Centuries have passed since the walls of the Library of Alexandria crumbled into dust. The scrolls are gone. The names of countless authors have vanished. The exact location of its halls remains uncertain, a mystery buried beneath layers of time-tide and human forgetfulness. And yet, it's still here, not in stone, not in fireproof vaults, but in the way we wonder. Every time a child asks, "Where did the stars come from?" Every time a teacher opens a book and begins with, "Long ago there was a place." Every time a question refuses to be silenced, the library flickers to life again. Because Alexandria was never just a building. It was a promise that knowledge would be pursued no matter how far, that languages would be preserved, that wisdom, no matter how old, still had something to teach us. And though we lost so much voices versus visions, we also gained something priceless. The understanding that knowledge is not invincible, so it must be protected, not by a few, but by all of us. By asking questions, by writing stories, by listening to those whose histories are still being written. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, remember this. There once was a place where the world tried to gather everything it knew, not for power, but for possibility. And though that place may be gone, its dream lives on in you. Because every time we seek to learn, we rebuild what was lost. If this story sparked something in you, consider subscribing to the channel for more true tales from the past that still speak to us today. Leave a comment below. What do you think the Library of Alexandria might have held? And what would you give to read just one of those scrolls? And be sure to join us next time, where we uncover another forgotten piece of history, one that just might change how you see the world. Good night, and keep the light of curiosity burning.